The first time I caught them trying to unlock my private gate with bolt cutters, I thought I was hallucinating. But no, there she was, Jolene Lancaster, president of the Oak Hill Trails HOA, standing on my driveway in her pastel pink suit like she owned the place. I was halfway through replacing a fence post when I heard the clicking. I turned around and there was Jolene, flanked by two HOA officers I didn't recognize. They were fiddling with the lock on my side gate, the one that leads to my backyard workshop. "Excuse me," I called out, dropping my drill. Jolene didn't even flinch. "Oh, Harold Granger," she said, like she was reciting a name off a nuisance list. "We need access to your rear easement. There are drainage inspections happening this week." I stepped between her and the gate. "The drainage line is city property. You can contact the city." "You don't touch my gate." One of her cronies, a sweaty guy in a polo shirt 2 sizes too small, muttered, "HOA bylaws say we can access easements." "Yeah," I replied, "then show me the bylaw that says you can break and enter." Jolene narrowed her eyes like I'd insulted her personally. "We're authorized. This is standard procedure," I laughed. "Standard procedure doesn't involve bolt cutters, Jolene. That's trespassing." She crossed her arms. "You're being uncooperative." "Damn right I am," I said. "You don't have the right to walk through my property just because you run a book club with a badge." Her eyes flicked to the camera mounted above my garage. I'd installed it last year after Jolene tried to fine me for having non-compliant lawn chairs on my porch. The footage had gotten that little stunt tossed out at the HOA's own hearing. She hadn't forgiven me since. "You'll be hearing from us," she snapped, turning on her heel and storming off. "Make sure it's in writing," I called after her. "I'll be forwarding it to my attorney." That night, I pulled the security footage and saved it to 3 flash drives. I also printed out every easement clause in the HOA bylaws and highlighted the section that clearly said, "Access through private property requires homeowner consent unless accompanied by municipal permit." They had neither. The next morning, I found a violation notice taped to my front door. "Obstruction of HOA access. A fine of $500, due in 7 days. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash. They wanted a fight. Fine. They were about to learn I don't lose them. The morning after I tossed their bogus fine in the trash, I drove straight to the city records office. If Jolene was going to keep pushing, I wanted every piece of paper that proved where my property ended and where any legitimate municipal access began. I walked out with a full survey map, a certified copy of my property deed, and a copy of the city's easement permit procedures. My gate. Solidly within my boundary. The rear drainage line. Accessible by the alley public access that ran behind the neighborhood and didn't require stepping foot on my lot. Back home, I scanned everything into a folder labeled HOA Shenanigans. Then I made 2 phone calls, one to my cousin Lena, a zoning attorney in the city, and one to my neighbor across the street, Rick, a retired firefighter who'd had his own run-ins with the HOA when they tried to fine him over a flagpole. Rick answered on the first ring. "You've got the Lancaster special, huh?" he said. "What's at this time?" They tried to cut my gate open. "Now they fine me for not letting them trespass." "You want backup?" "I want to build a wall of facts around my yard." "I'll bring my copy of the HOA charter. I've got the original from before they rewrote it last year without a vote." That last bit caught my attention. "They rewrote it?" "Yeah, snuck it through in a closed meeting, said it was just clarifications, but they added all kinds of garbage. Nobody saw it coming." Rick showed up that afternoon with a binder that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. We compared it to the current version Jolene had posted on the HOA website. Sure enough, there were entire paragraphs missing or rewritten, especially in the sections about property access and enforcement authority. I called Lena again. "They rewrote the bylaws without proper notice or vote," I told her. "That's a major procedural violation," Lena said. "HOAs are bound by their own governing documents. If they amended the charter without member approval, the new version's invalid. You can challenge it." Now I had a direction. But Jolene wasn't done. 2 days later, I came home to find a city code enforcement truck parked in front of my house. A man in a windbreaker with a clipboard was standing at the side gate, talking to Jolene, who was once again on my property like she had a lease. I parked and walked over. "Can I help you?" I asked. Jolene turned, her voice syrupy sweet. "We've submitted a municipal complaint about suspected violations in your backyard." The inspector gave a polite nod. "We received a report about an unpermitted structure on the rear side of the property." "Unpermitted?" I asked. "You mean my prefab tool shed? If it's larger than 120 square feet, it requires a permit." "It's 98, I said. "I have the receipt." Jolene's lips tightened. "Do you mind if I take a look?" the inspector asked. "Sure," I said, "through the side gate." "Not without a warrant or my consent, but I'll open the back gate and walk you through." Jolene looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. I led the inspector around back. We measured the shed, 98 on the dot. He jotted down a few notes and said, "Everything looks good." I walked him back out front, where Jolene was still standing like she expected an apology. "You always call the city hoping they'll do your dirty work," I asked her. She didn't answer, just gave me a cold look and walked off. The next morning, I received a new letter, this one on HOA letterhead that looked suspiciously homemade. It claimed that due to multiple acts of non-compliance and obstruction, I was being referred to the HOA's legal committee for further disciplinary action and possible lien proceedings. A lien. That crossed a whole new line. I drove straight to the county clerk's office and requested a lien search on my property. Nothing had been filed. Not yet, anyway. But the clerk, a grizzled man in his 60s, noticed the letter I was holding. "You say your HOA sent that?" "Yeah," he raised an eyebrow. "HOAs can't file liens unless there's a valid debt, and even then they have to notify the property owner by certified mail. That letter wouldn't hold up in court." I thanked him and left with a printout showing my title was clean. Back home, I drafted a formal cease and desist letter. I cited the illegality of threatening lien action without lawful basis, the unauthorized amendments to the charter, and the attempt to access private property without proper procedure. I CC'd Lena, the city permitting office, and the county records division. Then I dropped it off in person at the HOA office. The only person there was a part-time secretary who looked mildly terrified when I handed her the envelope. "Please ensure this gets to Mrs. Lancaster," I said. "And let her know I'm documenting every interaction." That was Friday. Saturday morning, a plain black SUV with tinted windows parked across from my house. The driver just sat there. No logo, no plates I could see clearly. I watched from the living room as Jolene walked up to the passenger side, leaned in, and handed something through the window. Security cameras caught the whole thing. I wasn't sure what I was looking at yet, but it didn't sit right. I sent the footage to Lena, who forwarded it to a contact in the city attorney's office. Sunday, things escalated. I woke up to find the gate lock had been removed, not cut unscrewed. Whoever did it had the right tools and knew exactly what they were doing. My camera facing the driveway had caught nothing because it had been unplugged from the outside. That was it. I called the police. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. One of them, Officer Salazar, took the report while I showed him the tampered camera and the missing lock. "Who do you suspect?" he asked. "I have a strong guess," I said, "but I'd prefer not to speculate. However, I have footage of someone meeting with an unmarked vehicle the day before." He raised an eyebrow. "Do you have that footage?" "I've already sent it to an attorney." "I can get you a copy," he nodded. "Tampering with surveillance equipment and accessing private property without permission is criminal trespass. If we can ID the person, we'll pursue it." I gave them everything: footage, gate photos, timestamps, the altered bylaws. Officer Salazar took it all seriously. Said he'd be back in touch once they reviewed the footage with their tech team. By Monday, word had gotten around. Rick wasn't the only neighbor who'd had issues. The couple next door, quiet folks in their 60s, stopped by with a folder of their own. Jolene had fined them last year for unauthorized landscaping. even though their front garden had been approved in writing by a previous board president. "I never challenged it," the wife said. "I didn't want trouble." "You've got it documented?" I asked. She nodded. "Give me a copy." I'm building something. Over the next 48 hours, I collected 6 more stories fines for phantom violations, threats of liens, retroactive enforcement of rules that didn't exist when the homes were built. All of them backed by paperwork. All of them signed by Jolene or her officers. I took it all to Lena. "You've got grounds for a formal complaint," she said. "And if there's evidence of tampering or unauthorized access, we can push criminal charges." She helped me draft a petition for a special HOA meeting, one that could only be called with signatures from 1/3 of the homeowners. We got the required number in 3 days. People were fed up. They just needed someone to go first. The petition was submitted Thursday. The bylaws, real ones, not Jolene's Frankenstein version, said the board had 10 days to respond. Jolene's silence was deafening, but she wasn't done. That weekend, a letter arrived not from the HOA, but from a private law firm in town. It accused me of harassment, defamation, and interference with the operations of a legally constituted board. It demanded I cease all direct contact with Jolene and threatened civil action if I continued to incite disruption. Lena read it and laughed. "They're trying to scare you off. They don't have a case, but this confirms something they're worried." "Then it's working," I said. The next move wasn't legal. It was strategic. We scheduled the special meeting. We booked the local library's community room. We mailed out notices ourselves, certified, with copies of the real bylaws attached. Every homeowner was invited. We made sure the rules were followed to the letter, because when you stand up to people who cheat, you don't just beat them, you bury them in the truth. The evening of the special meeting finally arrived, and the library's community room was packed. Folding chairs lined every inch of the carpeted floor, and the mood was electric tense, expectant, and just a little angry. No one from the current HOA board showed up. Not Jolene, not her so-called officers, no one. But that didn't stop the meeting from happening. According to the bylaws, their presence wasn't required for it to be valid, just the 33% quorum, which we had tripled. Rick stood near the front table, arms crossed. "Think they'll try to invalidate the meeting somehow?" "They might try," I said, laying out the attendance sheet and a stack of printed agendas. "But I had Lena notarize the petition and verify every signature. If they challenge it, they'll lose." Across the room, a voice rose. "Are we going to vote tonight?" It was Mrs. Pacheco, whose backyard gazebo had been declared unapproved 5 years after it was built, resulting in thousands of dollars in fines. She held a folder thick enough to stop traffic. "Yes," I said. "We're holding a vote to dissolve the current board and appoint an interim committee. Then we file a formal injunction to freeze all HOA enforcement until an audit is completed." A low murmur spread through the room. No one objected. The vote passed with 81 households in favor and 2 abstaining. The interim committee was formed right then and there with volunteers from the room. Rick took the lead role with Lena's advisory support. I stayed on as a liaison to the city attorney's office. But we weren't celebrating yet, because at dawn the next morning, Jolene retaliated. A stack of envelopes was hand-delivered to a dozen homes, including mine. Inside each was a notice of emergency enforcement escalation. According to the document, our properties had been placed in violation status under a temporary executive clause that gave the board emergency disciplinary discretion in times of community unrest. The language was so vague it was laughable, but the real bombshell was buried on the 3rd page, a claim that the board had filed liens on each of our homes. I drove straight to the county recorder's office again. The clerk, a different woman this time, pulled up the records and confirmed what I feared: 12 liens had been submitted overnight, all from the HOA, all signed by Jolene. "They were recorded just after 3 in the morning, she said, frowning. "That's unusual. These should have gone through verification." They're fraudulent, I said. None of the fines were legitimate. There are no judgments, no due process. Can I get certified copies? She nodded and began printing them. By the time I got home, Lena had already received half a dozen calls. She met me at my house, and together we went through the lien documents line by line. These filings were done without legal authority, she said. There's no adjudication process, no documentation of the original alleged violations. She's impersonating a legal process. I called Officer Salazar again, and this time he didn't just take a report, he brought a detective. Detective Hill was a tall, no-nonsense woman with a sharp gait and a tendency to tap her pen along the edge of her notebook when she got annoyed. She reviewed the lien filings, asked if anyone had received prior hearings, and flipped through the footage I had from the night before my cameras had caught a man in a gray hoodie dropping envelopes on porches at 4:12 a.m. This qualifies as filing fraudulent instruments with a government office, she said. That's a felony. She took everything documents, footage, statements, and promised we'd hear back soon. That Sunday, I was cleaning out the gutters when Rick walked over, holding a manila envelope. You're going to want to see this, he said. Inside were internal emails from one of Jolene's former officers, someone who had resigned quietly the year before. He dropped them anonymously in Rick's mailbox. The emails detailed conversations in which Jolene openly discussed strategic enforcement against homeowners who had an oppositional attitude. She even indicated that certain citations were issued without inspection, just to compel compliance through financial pressure. One line made my stomach turn. If we can't get access through the back, we'll find another way in. There's always a workaround. I scanned the sender info and dates. All of it matched up with incidents neighbors had described. I called Lena again. We're past civil issues now, she said. This is organized harassment under color of authority, and if she filed those liens knowing they were false, that's wire fraud and filing false public records. Detective Hill returned Monday afternoon with 2 uniformed officers. She asked me to step outside. We've issued a warrant for Jolene Lancaster, she said. We also have a subpoena for the HOA's internal records. Her office is being secured now. I nodded, stunned. How long will the investigation take? That depends on what we find in the records. But based on what you've provided, there's enough to pursue charges. By Tuesday morning, Jolene was in custody. The local news caught wind of it fast. A small headline appeared on the evening broadcast. HOA president arrested in fraud scheme. The footage showed her being escorted into a cruiser, lips pressed into a tight line, refusing to answer questions. The fallout was immediate. Residents flooded the interim committee with calls, emails, and offers to help. Volunteers organized a document review team. Lena worked with the city attorney's office to begin the process of reversing the fraudulent liens. And the county clerk's office issued a statement confirming that none of the liens would be enforced pending legal review. But the most satisfying moment came 3 days later when the city held a public forum on HOA oversight. I was invited to speak. As I stood at the podium, I looked out at the audience neighbors, city officials, reporters, even a few HOA board members from other communities. I recounted everything. The unauthorized gate access attempts, the fraudulent fines, the forged amendments, the secret lien filings. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. When I finished, the council chair leaned forward. Mr. Granger, what would you like to see happen going forward? I didn't hesitate. I want homeowners protected. I want oversight for HOAs that operate in the shadows. And I want people like Jolene Lancaster to understand that a title doesn't make you untouchable. It makes you accountable. The room broke into applause. Later that evening, Rick stopped by with a 6-pack and a grin. You know, he said, I think this neighborhood just found its spine again. We sat on my porch as the sun went down, listening to the crickets and sipping cold beer. For the first time in a long while, the street felt quiet in the right way, not silent with fear, peaceful and earned. 3 weeks after Jolene's arrest, the investigation had expanded further than anyone anticipated. What started with fraudulent fines and illegal liens had snowballed into something far uglier. Detective Hill returned to my doorstep, this time with a new badge in tow, Agent Rios, from the State Attorney General's Public Integrity Unit. I opened the door before they could knock. "Let me guess," I said. "You found more." Agent Rios adjusted his blazer and stepped in without ceremony. "Your HOA president didn't just bend the rules. She broke state law multiple times and she didn't work alone." Hill set a thick folder on my dining table. "We've traced a pattern of targeted enforcement, fabricated citations, and tampered HOA ballots going back over 3 years. I pulled out a chair. "Ballots?" Rios nodded. "She manipulated board elections, sent out altered ballots, discarded others. There's evidence she installed board members who never even lived in the neighborhood. 2 of the so-called officers on record don't appear to exist." I leaned back. "So the HOA board wasn't real, just her and a couple of people who signed whatever she told them to," Hill said. "One of them has already flipped. He gave us access to their private server." They opened a laptop and showed me a spreadsheet, rows of names, dates, addresses, and payment records. My name was there, highlighted in yellow. Next to it, a red column labeled compliance risk. I pointed to it. "What the hell is that?" "Her scoring system," Rios said. "She flagged residents who challenged her authority and prioritized them for enforcement. The higher the score, the more aggressively she went after them." I scanned the list. Familiar names filled the top. Rick, the Pachicos. A couple on Elm Court who'd been threatened with foreclosure over a fence color dispute. Even the quiet guy who walked his 3-legged dog every morning. "She was running a punishment campaign," I said. "She was running a racket," Hill corrected. "And we're charging her under the state's racketeering statute." I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I asked, "What happens to the HOA now?" "That's up to the residents," Rios said, "but the state's recommending full dissolution. We'll be filing a petition in district court next week." The community meeting to announce it was held in the rec center, one of the only things the HOA had actually maintained. Nearly every homeowner showed up. Lena stood beside Rick and me as Hill and Rios explained the charges, the ongoing investigation, and what would come next. No one interrupted. No one asked why. They all just listened, stunned, as the truth came out. Afterward, I stood outside, watching the crowd disperse under the fading sunset. Rick came up beside me, holding a thick envelope. "Someone left this on the sign and table," he said. "Didn't leave a name." I pulled it open. Inside were photos, dozens of them, showing Jolene and one of her fake officers entering backyards, removing cameras, even switching out mail from HOA boxes. One picture caught her with a crowbar, halfway through prying open a locked side gate. I held up the corner of the photo. "That's my fence." "Yup," Rick said, "and this one's the Pachicos." We turned them over. Each photo was labeled with a date and time. Whoever had taken them clearly knew what they were doing. Rick tapped the edge of the envelope. "You think it was the guy who flipped?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe someone else on the inside decided enough was enough." There was no return address, no note, just the evidence. We handed it over to Rios the next morning. He didn't ask where it came from, just added it to the file. By the end of the month, the court had granted the request to dissolve the HOA entirely. A trustee was appointed to oversee the transition, and a city liaison was assigned to help the neighborhood establish a volunteer-run community council, one that actually answered to residents. The fraudulent liens were officially voided. The county issued formal statements clearing all impacted titles. Every homeowner who'd been fined under Jolene's kangaroo court had their records wiped clean, and a restitution fund was established using recovered HOA funds, most of which had been sitting in a private account under Jolene's name. But one final twist came a week later. A local contractor named Ellis showed up at my door with a clipboard and a puzzled look. "You Harold Granger?" he asked. "Yeah," he glanced at the paper. "You signed off on a drainage reroute proposal last year." I never signed anything. He flipped the page around. Sure enough, there was my name crudely forged and a signature that looked like it had been written by someone using the wrong hand. "She said she had full community approval," Ellis muttered. "Even showed us letters from the city." "She lied," I said. "You might want to talk to the state." The reroute plan, it turned out, would have redirected runoff through the backyards of 5 homes, including mine, to make room for a new access road Jolene had secretly pitched to a housing developer. She'd hoped to sell off a sliver of common land to build 3 new executive townhomes, and she needed drainage clearance to make it legal. The deal died before it got off the ground. The developer's attorneys, now aware of the fraud, dropped everything and issued a public statement disassociating from the HOA. The city revoked the preliminary permits and flagged the entire parcel as under investigation. So much for executive townhomes. By the time Jolene's trial began, the neighborhood had already begun to heal. Fences were repaired. Gardens flourished again. People waved when they passed each other, and kids played in the cul-de-sac without their parents worrying about citations for toys left out. Rick and I were asked to testify during the trial. We weren't the only ones. Over 20 residents spoke, each one detailing the lies, the manipulation, and the fear they'd lived under. Jolene never looked at us once. She was convicted on 8 felony counts, including fraud, forgery, unlawful surveillance tampering, and criminal impersonation of public authority. She was sentenced to 7 years with parole eligibility in 4. The judge denied her request for house arrest. When it was over, I walked out of the courthouse with Lena and Rick. The air felt different, lighter. "You ever think it would come to this?" Rick asked. "No," I said, "but I'm glad it did." We paused at the steps. I looked back at the building behind us. "You know, I think it's the first time I've seen real justice up close." Lena smiled. "It doesn't always come fast, but when it does, it sticks." Back home, I opened the gate, the same one they'd tried to cut, climb, and sneak through, and walked around to the backyard. The shed stood exactly where it always had, untouched and still legal as ever. I pulled out a lawn chair, sat down, and listened to the wind slide through the trees. No notices taped to my door. No strange cars parked across the street. No envelopes filled with threats, just quiet. And the knowledge that the next person who tried to play HOA dictator would think twice. Because this neighborhood had learned how to fight back, and this time, it wasn't backing down.